Amid the endless sweep of golden sands, colossal stones rise like silent guardians defying the march of centuries. Their shadows stretch across time itself, whispering secrets that no historian has yet unlocked. But these mysteries are not confined to deserts alone. In the dense jungles of Central America, moss-covered temples hide beneath tangled roots. Far beneath the ocean's surface, strange structures shimmer, hinting at civilizations swallowed by the waves. And in the skies above, fleeting lights dance and vanish, as if mocking our attempts to explain them. Across every corner of the earth, the unknown persists untamed, unbroken, unyielding. What forces carved these monuments? Who raised them? And why do their purposes remain beyond our grasp? The unanswered questions do more than haunt us. They invite us to wonder if history is far stranger than we dare believe. Now, step beyond the comfort of the present. Imagine yourself as an archaeologist brushing sand from an ancient stone, an explorer hacking through vines in a forgotten temple, or simply a curious traveler drawn into a story older than memory itself. And as we begin this journey together, don't forget, follow this channel to keep unraveling the enigmas of our world. Then, join the conversation. Leave a comment telling us what time you're listening and where in the world you are right now. Egypt's vanished underground labyrinth, the lost maze of Mendet. Greek historian Herodotus wrote of a grand underground labyrinth near the ancient city of Crocodilopolis in Egypt. He claimed it contained 3,000 chambers filled with hieroglyphs and reliefs. Modern archaeologists have never found such a complex. You stand in the Fayum region near the pyramids of Hawara, feeling the midday heat bake the desert. The sand stretches in all directions, hiding what may lie beneath. Your interest in the labyrinth grew after reading Herodotus's description. I saw this with my own eyes, a work surpassing the pyramids. Later, Roman writers confirmed its existence, yet excavations have revealed only remains of a mortuary temple. When a geophysical survey of the area detected anomalies, rumors of a buried complex reignited, prompting you to visit. The landscape is stark. A few date palms cast sparse shade. The air smells of dust and Nile mud. Archaeologists have dug trenches revealing mud brick walls and columns from Amenemhat-III's pyramid complex. You peer into a square hole where water seeps up, making the ground treacherous. Local farmers recall stories of their grandparents finding carved stones when digging wells. A faint breeze carries the scent of reeds from the nearby lake. At the edge of the site, a researcher shows you ground-penetrating radar images. Patterns suggest voids beneath the sand, possibly tunnels or chambers. You watch as a probe is lowered into a well. The rope grows taut, then slackens as it touches water. When the probe is pulled back up, it brings fragments of polished limestone. Under magnification, the pieces show incised lines as if part of an inscription. Your pulse quickens, evidence of something man-made below. Suddenly, the wind picks up, blowing sand into your eyes. A dust devil spins across the site, scattering papers and tools. Workers scramble to cover equipment. In the chaos, you glimpse a rectangular depression in the sand. You hadn't noticed its edges too regular to be natural. When you mention it to the team, they mark it for future excavation. The storm passes, leaving ripples on the dunes like waves on a sea of sand. Later, over tea in a nearby village, you discuss findings. Some scholars argue the labyrinth was a metaphor or an exaggeration by Herodotus. Others think it lies destroyed, its stones quarried by later builders. A few believe it still exists, flooded by rising groundwater. The Hawara pyramid's substructure is complex with multiple passages and hidden chambers. Satellite imagery hints at rectangular outlines buried deeper. Theories about the labyrinth's purpose include a monumental administrative center, a ceremonial maze for initiations, or a giant tomb complex. Some link it to the myth of the Minotaur, suggesting cultural exchange. Fringe theories describe it as a repository of ancient knowledge sealed to protect secrets. Without excavation, these remain speculation. That night, you dream of walking through endless corridors lit by oil lamps. Walls are covered in scenes of kings and gods. The air is cool and smells of stone and water. Every turn reveals more passages. You wake with sand in your hair and the feeling that some labyrinths exist both in the earth and in the imagination, waiting for those who dare to find them. Heraklion, Egypt's underwater city, temples beneath the tide. In the shallow waters off Egypt's northern coast, divers descend through a murky green world. Shafts of sunlight penetrate the waves, illuminating columns, statues, and crumbled walls lying on the seabed. Fish dart among hieroglyphic-inscribed blocks. This is Heraklion, an ancient port city, once bustling with priests and merchants, now submerged. You float weightless above a toppled statue of Hapi, the Nile god, feeling both awe and the weight of time pressing down through water. Your invitation came from a marine archaeologist who included a photograph of a colossal red granite pharaoh's face resting on sand. His note read, "Come see the gods asleep." Intrigued by tales of a lost city mentioned by Herodotus and long dismissed as myth, you accepted. You trained for months to dive in zero visibility conditions, driven by the promise of touching history hidden for centuries. The dive begins from a small boat bobbing in Abu Qir Bay. The smell of diesel mixes with salt. You put on a dry suit and slip into water that is surprisingly warm. Visibility is limited, fine silt clouds at the slightest motion. As your eyes adjust, shapes emerge: a giant hand carved in red granite, then a fragment of a stela with Greek and Egyptian text. Eelgrass brushes your fingers. Your breathing echoes in your ears, rhythmic and calming. You follow a guideline to the remains of a temple pylon. Its blocks are encrusted with marine growth, but still bear reliefs of offerings. You shine your light into a cavity and discover a bronze statuette of Isis wedged between stones. Its features are remarkably preserved, the eyes inlaid with gold foil. As you carefully extract it, a surge in the current tugs you sideways. You grip the rope and feel a low-frequency vibration like distant thunder underwater. Suddenly, the water around you becomes hazy. The silt rises, and your visibility drops to nothing. The rope in your hand thrums as if plucked. For a few seconds, you hear a hum that seems to come from the stones themselves. You hold still until the current eases and the cloud settles. The sensation of being in a living, breathing city that still shifts below the sea is uncanny. Back on the boat, you handle the recovered statuette. Later in the lab, X-rays reveal inscriptions referencing a festival dedicated to Osiris that took place annually at Heraklion. Ancient texts describe the city as a hub where taxes were collected and temples housed relics. Earthquakes and a rise in sea level likely caused the land to liquefy and sink. The discovery of shipwrecks with Greek pottery shows it was a melting pot of cultures. Theories about Heraklion's fate include a combination of subsidence tsunamis and sediment compaction. Some suggest the city gradually sank as the delta's weight shifted. Others propose a single catastrophic event. There is speculation that Heraklion was the same as Thonis mentioned in Egyptian texts, meaning two names for one city. A fringe hypothesis wonders if religious taboos kept people from rebuilding. Archaeologists are careful not to overstate, but each artifact hints at life abruptly interrupted by water. That evening on deck, under a canopy of stars, you dream you are walking along a temple colonnade. Bells ring and priests chant. The ground trembles. Water seeps through cracks. As you turn to run, waves crash over the pylons and you are submerged. You wake with damp hair and the taste of brine, feeling the boundary between land and sea blur in your mind. Cave Tomb of Confusion. The mysterious mummy of Amarna. Deep within Egypt's Valley of the Kings lies a tomb catalogued as KV-5. Discovered in 1907, it contained a single badly decayed mummy in a hastily prepared coffin, along with artifacts bearing names of Akhenaten and Kia. The tomb seemed to mix funerary goods from different people, confusing generations of Egyptologists. You walk down the modern metal stairs into the narrow corridor, the air cool and dusty. The limestone walls are undecorated, as if the burial was hurried. A faint odor of ancient resin lingers. Your involvement began when you read a research paper that used DNA analysis to link the KV-5 mummy to Tutankhamun as his father. Another article argued that the bones were those of a young man, possibly Smenkhkare. The contradictions intrigued you. When a conservation team offered tours of the tomb to raise funds, you signed up eager to see the evidence firsthand and feel the space where history's puzzle lay. Inside the burial chamber, a reconstructed coffin lies open. Its gilded panels are damaged. The face mask is missing. Nearby, a set of shrines originally meant for Queen Tia's burial are stacked, their inscriptions chipped. You notice that some spells in the coffin texts are scratched out as if someone tried to remove names. A broken magic brick with Akhenaten's name rests in a niche. The mismatched items give the room an unsettled energy. Examining a pillar base, you find a faint ink inscription referencing year 3 of Tutankhamun's reign, suggesting that this was a secondary burial. As you lean in, a gust of wind seems to arise from the shaft, carrying a sweet smell like lotus. Your flashlight flickers. For a moment, you feel as if someone is standing behind you, but when you turn, the room is empty. Sweat beads on your forehead despite the cool air. Back outside, the desert sun feels blinding. You review notes in the shade of a rock. An Egyptologist points out that the skull's sutures indicate an individual around 35 years old, matching Akhenaten's estimated age. However, the pelvis suggests a younger man. DNA studies show the mummy is Tutankhamun's father, but mitochondrial DNA could also fit Smenkhkare, whose history is murky. The coffin's inscriptions may have been altered, pointing to political motives behind the reburial. Later, in a Luxor library, you consult old excavation diaries. Theodore Davis, who funded the dig, initially believed he had found Akhenaten. Howard Carter disagreed. The mummy's posture was unusual. The arms were at the sides rather than crossed. Radiocarbon dating places the burial within a decade of the Amarna period. Each piece of data seems to answer one question and raise another. Theories range widely. Many modern scholars now lean toward Akhenaten as the occupant reburied by Tutankhamun to legitimize his own reign. Others argue the mix of artifacts suggests Smenkhkare, a co-regent who disappeared from records. A minority proposed the tomb was a cache for multiple royal items, moved hastily to protect them from tomb robbers. The political chaos following Akhenaten's religious reforms adds layers to the puzzle. That night, you dream of a body being carried through desert twilight. Priests whisper prayers, their torches flickering. Names are spoken and erased masks swapped. The procession slips into a hidden valley. You wake with the sense that identity can be as fragile as papyrus, and that sometimes ambiguity is intentionally preserved to guard secrets. Mystery of the Saqqara sarcophagi, colorful coffins and questions. At the ancient necropolis of Saqqara south of Cairo, archaeologists have recently unearthed dozens of wooden sarcophagi stacked in shafts. Painted in vivid blues, reds, and golds, the coffins look as if they were buried yesterday despite being over 2,500 years old. You descend a wooden staircase into one of these shafts, the air cool and heavy with the scent of incense and dust. Flickering lights reveal rows of faces painted on coffin lids, eyes outlined with kohl, serene and otherworldly. Your interest was sparked by watching the Netflix documentary Secrets of the Saqqara Tomb, which followed the discovery of a family tomb. A news article later reported on the excavation of more than 100 coffins in 20. Archaeologists appeared almost overwhelmed by the abundance. When an opportunity arose to volunteer at the site through a university program, you applied eager to help catalog the finds and experience the thrill of discovery. The shaft is deep with narrow ledges built into the walls for coffins. Each sarcophagus is unique, adorned with hieroglyphs and depictions of deities. The colors are preserved thanks to the dry sand and resin coatings. You gently brush sand from a lid to reveal a depiction of the goddess Nut stretching across the sky. The wood creaks slightly, as if exhaling. The silence in the chamber is thick. As you assist a conservator, you notice that some coffins bear the names of high priests of the 26th dynasty, while others belong to middle-class individuals. The mixing suggests the shaft was reused over generations. In one corner, you find a small statue of the god Ta-Sokar Osiris wrapped in linen. A faint whiff of resin and cedar sar emerges as you handle it. Your hands tremble slightly at the thought of disturbing someone's eternal rest. Suddenly, a muffled thud echoes from above as if something heavy fell. Dust rains down. The lights flicker. For a second, you imagine hearing whispering. Everyone freezes, listening. The moment passes and work resumes. The tension underscores the delicacy of working in such an environment where any misstep could damage artifacts or trigger collapses. Back at camp, you read about the mystery surrounding the sheer number of coffins. Some scholars suggest a surge in burials occurred when Saqqara became a major pilgrimage site during the late period. Others propose that plagues or economic changes led to mass interments. A papyrus fragment mentions a tax on mummification, hinting at commercialization of death. CT scans reveal that some coffins contain multiple mummified bodies, possibly family members. Theories about why the coffins were so well preserved include the sealing of shafts with limestone blocks, the use of antimicrobial resins, and the dry microclimate. Some fringe ideas speculate that the priests used secret chemicals lost to time. The quantity of coffins raises questions about social hierarchies and burial practices. Were these people buried hastily, or was this an organized necropolis? Each answer leads to another question. That night, you dream of painted faces watching from the edges of your vision. They whisper ancient spells as you float down a shaft, light fading. You wake with the impression of blue and gold patterns and the realization that even in death, these individuals command attention and inspire wonder. Nazca lines, messages in the desert. On a high plateau in southern Peru, enormous geoglyphs etched into the desert depict animals, plants, and geometric designs. Known as the Nazca lines, they are so large that they can only be fully appreciated from the air. You stand on a viewing tower overlooking part of the plain. The sun is intense, and heat radiates from the ground. The dry air smells of dust and minerals. Below, a spiral design unfurls across the arid surface, its grooves pale against darker gravel. Your fascination with the Nazca lines began when you saw aerial photos of a giant hummingbird and spider carved into the earth. Later, you read about theories ranging from astronomical calendars to ritual walkways. You booked a small plane flight over the plateau, excited and a little apprehensive about the tiny aircraft. From the air, the scale of the lines is astonishing. The hummingbird measures over 90 meters long. The plane banks so both sides can view. You see the monkey with its spiral tail, the condor with outstretched wings and many straight lines that run for kilometers arrow straight. Some lines intersect, forming trapezoids and triangles. The landscape below looks like a parchment on which giants scribbled. On the ground later, you walk along one of the lines. It is a shallow trench about 10 centimeters deep and a meter wide, cleared of dark stones to reveal lighter soil beneath. Walking along it, you feel like part of a procession. The desert is silent except for the wind. Small cairns of stones dot the area. You bend down and pick up a stone, noticing it is coated with a dark patina from centuries of exposure. A dust devil sweeps across the plain, temporarily erasing footprints. The wind whips your hat. For a moment, you lose your sense of orientation among the geometric patterns. The heat distorts the horizon. A condor soars overhead, mirroring the geoglyph below. You feel both grounded and disoriented in this landscape of human and natural lines. In a nearby museum, you examine pottery shards painted with similar designs. Researchers explain that the Nazca people likely created the lines between 500 BCE and 500 CE. Some lines align with solstice sunrises, supporting the calendar theory. Others connect to ceremonial centers, suggesting pilgrimage routes. Underground aqueducts called puquillos supply water, and some lines seem to radiate from these. The dry climate has preserved the geoglyphs remarkably. Theories abound. Some see the figures as offerings to deities who controlled rainfall. Others propose giant looms for making textiles. Fringe theories invoke extraterrestrials or ancient runways. Experimental archaeologists have recreated lines using simple surveying tools and ropes, showing that large labor forces were not necessary. The mystery lies more in purpose than in technique. That night in a desert lodge, you dream of walking along glowing lines under a starry sky. Each step hums with energy. Figures rise from the ground illuminated in gold, then lay back down. You wake with dust in your throat and a sense that the Nazca lines are messages written to the sky and those patient enough to view them from above. Philadelphia Experiment, Warped Metal and Vanished Men. You grew up in the shadow of the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, your childhood filled with the deep clang of metal and the smell of oil. Decades later, you work as a freelance science writer, chasing stories that straddle the edge between fact and fringe. One autumn afternoon, a faded blue envelope arrives in your mailbox. Inside is an old photograph of the destroyer USS Eldridge and a handwritten note. They made us invisible. We never came back the same. It's unsigned, but a smudge of soot on the corner smells of diesel and ozone. That night, you can't sleep, imagining sailors shimmering out of existence in a harbor you once rode past on your bike. You decide to investigate what really happened during the so-called Philadelphia Experiment of 1943. You find the return address of the envelope leads to an assisted living facility in New Jersey. The sender is a man named Thomas, a retired electrician's mate. When you visit, he speaks in a raspy whisper. He recounts an experiment gone wrong of green fog enveloping the Eldridge and the ship flickering like a candle about to go out. He claims he saw crewmen fused to metal bulkheads when the fog lifted their bodies, distorted as if matter and machine had blended. He shoves a small brass dial into your hand. From the deck, he says, closing your fingers over it. His urgency hooks you. Why would an old sailor carry such memories if there was nothing there? You promise to look through archival records, newspaper clippings, and declassified memos, feeling a responsibility to his story. During World War II, the U.S. Navy sought any advantage to protect convoys from German U-boats. One area of research focused on degaussing ships to avoid magnetic mines. Conspiracy theorists later claim the Navy attempted something far more radical, rendering a ship invisible to radar or even to the naked eye by manipulating electromagnetic fields. The legend holds that on a late October day in 1943, The USS Eldridge was fitted with generators and coils, then enveloped in a field that caused it to vanish from its berth and reappear in Norfolk, Virginia, before returning to Philadelphia. Official Navy histories insist that no such experiment occurred and that the Eldridge was never in Philadelphia at the time. In microfilm archives, you find press releases about routine trials, but the pages you're most interested in are blank torn or redacted. A sense of suppression lingers like dust. Your research leads you to interview a physicist who worked on naval projects during the war. He laughs at talk of teleportation, but admits that early radar stealth tests produced unexpected effects, statically charged decks, causing crew's hair to stand on end, arcs of blue fire dancing along railings in humid weather. You track down dock logs from Norfolk, showing that on the day in question, the Eldridge indeed passed through the area. The times, however, don't align neatly with official records. In a dusty second-hand bookstore, you stumble upon a diary kept by an onshore watchman. His entry for October 28th mentions a blinding green glow above the harbor and men screaming as if far away. He describes one sailor stumbling ashore disoriented, claiming to have been stuck half in and half out of the deck plates. The watchman writes that military police confiscated his diary a day later. How did this copy escape? The discovery both intrigues and unnerves you. As you dig deeper, you find yourself receiving anonymous emails warning you to stop. Someone leaves a file on your car windshield containing a list of names of sailors who died in training accidents around the same time. One night you wake to your smoke alarm shrilling. The brass dial Thomas gave you sits on your bedside table, glowing faintly green in the dark. You pick it up and feel a low vibration like the hum of a generator through steel. The next day, your computer hard drive fails. Months of notes vanish. These events could be chalked up to coincidence and paranoia, but you can't shake the sensation of being observed. You dream of standing on a ship's deck as waves of light roll over you, body flickering. In the dream, you try to move, but your limbs merge into the steel, your scream swallowed by the ship. Back in Thomas's room, you ask him why he sent the note now. He whispers that his shipmates were sworn to secrecy, threatened with court-martial if they spoke. Many died with the story. He felt compelled to unburden himself before his time came. You show him the diary entry, and he nods. You later speak with a naval historian who reminds you of Occam's razor wartime accidents and folklore combined to create a legend. He points out that after the war, a merchant seaman named Carl Allen wrote letters to a UFO researcher claiming to have witnessed the experiment, likely embellishing events to impress. Yet, you counter legends often start with a kernel of truth. The science of electromagnetic fields is complex. Small miscalculations could produce lethal arcs or strange optical effects. Even if the Eldridge didn't teleport, could a poorly shielded generator have created static discharges and hallucinations? The line between truth and exaggeration blurs like the horizon on a foggy sea. One theory suggests that the vanishing was actually a byproduct of degaussing experiments combined with a temperature inversion that caused light to bend around the ship, making it appear indistinct. Another posits that sailors exposed to strong electromagnetic fields suffered transient neurological symptoms, leading to disorientation and later embellishments about teleportation. A fringe group insists that Einstein's unified field theory was secretly tested, briefly opening a portal. They cite unsourced memos about Project Rainbow. Skeptics argue that Carl Allen was a fabulist and that the Eldridge's timeline proves it never visited Philadelphia. The truth may be a tangle of misremembered trials rumor and the human brain's tendency to fill gaps with narrative. A week after Thomas passes away, you receive another envelope with no return address. Inside is a photograph of a young sailor standing proudly on the deck of the Eldridge. On the back is scrawled, "We were there." remember us. Along with the photo is a set of coordinates in the Delaware River. At low tide, you take a small boat out and drop a weighted line. The depth finder flickers, then blanks, then returns. For a moment, you imagine an unseen hull just out of phase with reality. A ghost ship existing a fraction of a second from your own world. You pull the brass dial from your pocket. It hums softly. Whether the Philadelphia experiment happened, as legend says, it has burrowed into the culture, an invisible ship casting a shadow you can almost feel. You look across the water and think about how some stories are experiments in themselves, warping perception long after the equipment is powered down. Queen Ankhesenamun's unknown fate, echoes of a pharaoh's bride. As a graduate student in Egyptology, you have spent endless hours leaning over hieroglyphs in dimly lit archives. Your thesis advisor once joked that your tan would come from lamplight instead of sun. One rainy afternoon in Cairo's Egyptian Museum, while cataloging old correspondences, you come across a brittle papyrus tucked inside a forgotten drawer. Its text features a queen begging the Hittite king for a husband, because her husband the pharaoh has died and she has no sons. The letter's tone is desperate yet regal. Many scholars believe it to have been written by Ankhesenamun, widow of Tutankhamun, but the mystery of her life after his death remains. The note seems to call to you personally, pleading for her story to be told. You decide to follow the faint footprints she left through history. Why did a queen who had been married to the boy king write to a foreign enemy seeking a husband? And what became of her after? The question fascinates you because it merges human emotion with the high politics of New Kingdom Egypt. During a guest lecture, an older archaeologist mentions a set of rings found in an antiquity shop in Luxor, engraved with the cartouches of Ankhesenamun and a mysterious pharaoh named Ai. He suggests that Ankhesenamun was forced into marriage with Ai to legitimize his claim to the throne. You feel a surge of indignation on her behalf. Determined to trace her final steps, you secure a grant to join a dig in the Valley of the Kings near a set of unexplored chambers whose radar scans hint at hidden voids. You hope to find a burial that can answer centuries-old questions. Ankhesenamun was born into turmoil, the daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, during a time of religious revolution. She married her half-brother Tutankhamun when both were teenagers. After his sudden death around age 19, she disappears from most official records. Some clues suggest she corresponded with the Hittites, offering herself in marriage to secure a powerful ally. An unprecedented request for an Egyptian queen. The prince sent by the Hittite king was reportedly murdered on the border. Ankhesenamun's name was then paired with eyes on artifacts hinting at a union of convenience. Her tomb has never been conclusively identified. Scholars debate whether she lies in a hidden chamber adjacent to Tutankhamun's tomb, or was buried elsewhere under a different name. The dryness of the desert has preserved many secrets, but sand and rock also keep them jealously. Your team excavates a series of shafts near KV-62 Tutankhamun's tomb. In the oppressive heat of July, sand lifts like talcum powder with each stroke of your brush. After weeks of slow progress, you uncover a limestone doorway sealed with mud bricks, stamped with the Royal Necropolis stamp. When the door is pried open, a corridor appears painted with faded images of lotus flowers and protective deities. Inside the chamber lies a gilded shrine, similar in style to those of the 18th dynasty. The sarcophagus within is intact, but the cartouche on its lid has been chiseled away, a deliberate erasure. You feel your heart hammering as the lid is lifted. Inside, the mummy's arms are crossed in royal pose. The body is that of a woman slender and around 5'6". She wears jewelry you recognize from Amarna period art. Yet without a cartouche or inscriptions, definitive identification is elusive. DNA testing later reveals she shares genetic markers with Tutankhamun. Could this be Ankhesenamun news of the discovery leaks, and before the team can properly document the tomb looters' attempt to break in? One night, you and two guards hear shuffling at the entrance and catch a glimpse of flashlight beams bouncing off rock. You shout and give chase through narrow wadi paths until the intruders scatter into the dark. The incident heightens pressure from Egypt's Antiquities Authority to either seal the site or reveal its contents publicly. Meanwhile, analysis of the artifacts suggests the burial was hastily assembled. Some items bear the name of I and others of Tutankhamun. The mixture fuels controversy. Sensational headlines proclaim that Ankhesenamun has been found, but some colleagues caution that the genetic evidence is circumstantial. The more public interest grows, the more you worry that politics will override careful scholarship. Your notes overflow with questions you cannot yet answer. While awaiting further test results, you immerse yourself in letters and murals. You realize Ankhesenamun's story is in many ways that of women in power throughout history, navigating alliances, marriages, and survival in patriarchal systems. Her plea to the Hittite king reads like an act of agency, yet her possible marriage to I suggests limited options. The erasure of her name on the sarcophagus lid implies that later rulers wished to erase her, or perhaps reuse her burial for a favored relative. In the museum's quiet, you run your fingers along the engraved image of a queen offering offerings to a goddess, and you feel a kinship. Her face looks serene, but her life must have been marked by fear and resilience. Whether or not the mummy is hers, the find underscores how easily someone so powerful can slip from record, leaving behind only clues and questions. Some scholars argue that Ankhesenamun was killed before she could marry the Hittite prince, possibly orchestrated by I, who sought the throne. Others think she married I but died soon after her burial, intentionally hidden to prevent her tomb from being robbed. A fringe theory suggests she escaped Egypt altogether, living out her days anonymously in a foreign court. Genetic analyses hint that a mummy known as KV-21A, found earlier, could be Tutankhamun's wife based on lineage markers. The new discovery may belong to another royal female from the same period, such as a daughter of A. The mysteries multiply rather than diminish. You note how often absence of evidence births speculation as people project narratives onto gaps. Months after the discovery, the tomb is closed again to await further study. You return to your university, your suitcase heavier with books, and your mind with possibilities. At your desk, you re-examine the plea from the Hittite letter. You picture a young queen writing it by lamplight, her hand shaking. You wonder whether she ever received a reply. Sometimes late at night, you think you hear her voice, soft as papyrus rustling, "Remember me." You make a note to propose a seminar on forgotten royal women. Ankhesenamun's fate remains unknown, but her faint signature across time has pulled you into her story, making her more than a footnote. Somewhere under sand or behind a wall, perhaps her name still lies intact, waiting to tell the end of her tale. Secrets beneath the Great Sphinx, hidden chambers and whispers. You are an acoustic engineer who has spent years studying how vibrations travel through rock. One evening, you attend a lecture at a university in Cairo, where a geophysicist presents seismic data, suggesting voids beneath the Great Sphinx. During the Q&A, he mentions anomalies, a hollow area beneath the pause, perhaps a chamber. The official line is that no such space exists. After the talk, he slips you a thumb drive containing raw data and says, "See what you can make of this." Your curiosity ignited, you begin analyzing the frequencies, looking for echoes that indicate cavities. Late at night, you listen to recordings of seismic waves and imagine ancient corridors carved under the sands of Giza, waiting to be discovered. You want to know whether there are indeed rooms beneath the Sphinx, perhaps hiding texts or treasures. Legends mention the Hall of Records, a library of knowledge from a lost civilization, supposedly sealed under the paws. Archaeologists dismiss this as myth, but the seismic anomalies are compelling. You decide to join an independent team of researchers planning to conduct a ground-penetrating radar GPR survey around the Sphinx under the guise of routine maintenance checks. The risk of being caught circumventing Egypt's strict antiquities regulations is high, but the lure of potentially rewriting history draws you in. You calibrate your equipment plan, the survey pattern, and pray you don't attract unwanted attention. The Great Sphinx is one of the most iconic monuments in the world, carved from bedrock on the Giza Plateau. Though much studied, the area around and beneath it remains partially unexplored due to governmental restrictions aimed at preventing damage. In the 1990s, a team conducted a seismic survey that hinted at cavities under the monument. Egyptian authorities later denied the significance of the findings. Legends inspired by Edgar Cayce speak of a hall of records containing knowledge from Atlantis hidden beneath the Sphinx. The Sphinx's own builders left no texts about their methods or intentions. This combination of incomplete knowledge and mystical speculation provides fertile ground for rumors. Conventional archaeologists warn against pseudo-history, yet curiosity persists. During the survey, you and your team discreetly wheel a GPR device near the Sphinx at dawn, when tourist traffic is minimal. The machine sends microwave pulses into the ground and listens for reflections. As the data streams in, you see anomalies, linear discontinuities, and voids at depths of a few meters. One particularly strong reflection suggests an empty space directly under the Sphinx's right paw. Another appears deeper beneath the chest. The shapes are rectangular. Your heart races. The raw data alone cannot indicate whether these are natural fissures, ancient tunnels, or modern repairs. But combined with the earlier seismic data, the case grows stronger that something man-made lies below. You whisper excitedly to your colleague. Suddenly, a security guard approaches. You freeze. He frowns at your equipment. You pretend to be calibrating for restoration work. He eyes you for a moment, then moves on. Relief floods you, but you know the clock is ticking. After the survey, you attempt to share the findings with archaeologists. Most react skeptically. A prominent Egyptologist accuses your team of sensationalism, warning that claiming hidden chambers attracts conspiracy theorists and undermines conservation efforts. The Antiquities Ministry calls your permit into question, threatening to ban you from future work on the plateau. Meanwhile, a tabloid runs a headline: "Secret Rooms Under Sphinx Proof of Lost Civilization." You are contacted by a man claiming to represent a private foundation willing to fund an excavation in exchange for exclusive rights to findings. He hints that there are powerful interests who want to keep whatever is buried there hidden. The situation becomes politically charged. You must decide whether to continue pursuing the truth or step back to avoid personal and professional jeopardy. On a rooftop in Cairo, you review the data under the desert stars. You ponder the ethics of excavation. Tunnels and chambers, if they exist, may be fragile, and opening them could damage priceless heritage. You also think about how easily myths can fill gaps in knowledge. The Hall of Records narrative, for example, comes from 20th century psychic readings, yet it has seeped into popular consciousness. You ask yourself whether you are chasing a story or legitimate science. The answer lies in rigorous analysis, verifying data, considering alternative explanations like subsurface cracks or modern drainage works. You decide to publish your findings in a peer-reviewed journal, emphasizing uncertainty and avoiding sensational claims. The Sphinx keeps its counsel, but your understanding of how science and lore intertwine deepens. One theory asserts there are natural cavities beneath the Sphinx formed by groundwater erosion, later interpreted as chambers. Another posits that ancient Egyptians carved tunnels for maintenance or ritual purposes which have since been sealed. Believers in lost civilizations argue that the voids house records of Atlantis or advanced technology hidden by priests. Skeptics maintain that instrumentation errors created false positives in the surveys. Some Egyptologists suggest that the anomalies may be rubble-filled pits from earlier excavations by 19th century treasure hunters. Without excavation and thorough documentation, each idea remains speculation. The debate highlights how little is truly known about what lies under our feet. A year later, your paper is published, sparking both interest and criticism. The Antiquities Ministry allows a limited supervised drilling of one anomaly, which reveals a small void filled with sand and pottery shards, possibly a storage niche from a later period. There is no grand library. Yet, the existence of even a modest space shows that assumptions can be wrong. Other anomalies remain untested. You continue working in acoustics occasionally, giving lectures on your experiences. When asked if you believe there is a hall of records, you smile and say that the real records lie in the stones themselves, in the work of the artisans, and the reverence of people who built and preserved the Sphinx. As you walk past the monument on a weekend, children play nearby. The Sphinx watches silently, keeping its secrets for another generation of curious minds to ponder. Texarkana Moonlight Murders, Phantom Killer of the Night. As a criminologist specializing in cold cases, you've studied patterns of violence across decades. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders of 1946 stand out for their brutality and the enduring mystery surrounding the perpetrator. Over 10 weeks, an unknown assailant attacked 8 people in the border town of Texarkana, Texas, Arkansas, mostly courting couples parked on lovers' lanes. He wore a white mask and wielded a .32 caliber pistol. He killed 5 victims and seriously injured 3. Newspapers dubbed him the Phantom Killer. He was never caught. When you receive a grant to re-examine the case using modern investigative techniques, you travel to Texarkana. The small city still feels haunted. Locals lock their doors at dusk, and older residents whisper about the phantom as if he might reappear. You wonder whether there is new evidence to uncover, or if some ghosts resist exorcism. The case file includes ballistic reports, autopsy notes, and witness statements. You intend to digitize these and run modern ballistic comparison on recovered bullets. You also plan to test surviving evidence for DNA, though years and handling may have degraded samples. The survivors' accounts describe a tall man with heavy breathing eyes behind a mask. They recall phrases he uttered, like telling a victim not to scream. Your goal is to build a behavioral profile and cross-reference with military records. Many suspects were questioned at the time, including war veterans suffering trauma. Understanding who might have committed the crimes and why could bring closure. You know you may not identify the killer, but you hope to reduce speculation and humanize the victims beyond their newspaper monikers. Texarkana in 1946 was a small town recovering from World War II. Couples would park on secluded roads to escape watchful eyes. The first attack occurred on February 20, leaving 2 wounded. The second in March left a couple dead. The third in April resulted in another murder. The final attack in May targeted families in their farmhouse, killing the husband and severely injuring the wife. The killer struck on weekends under a waxing moon. Law enforcement agencies from 2 states collaborated but faced jurisdictional complexities. Panic gripped the town. Vigilante groups patrolled streets. Sales of guns and locks skyrocketed. Films like The town that dreaded sundown later fictionalized the events, cementing them in pop culture. Various suspects emerged: a saxophone-playing soldier, a car thief, a local drifter. None were charged. You obtain permission to access evidence stored in a county facility. There you examine clothing with bullet holes and dried blood. Unfortunately, DNA extraction yields nothing usable. Ballistic testing of bullets recovered from different scenes confirms they were fired from the same weapon. No match exists in current databases. You review police interviews and notice overlooked details. One survivor mentioned a distinctive cologne scent. Another recalled the killer's soft hands, perhaps indicating he was not a laborer. You interview the children of a chief suspect, a recluse named U.L. Swinney, who was arrested for car theft around the time. They recall their father being absent on weekends. Another candidate, a veteran with psychiatric issues, committed suicide in 1948. Your behavioral profile suggests someone with pent-up rage, familiarity with the area, and ability to appear harmless. As you compile your findings, resistance surfaces. A local historian warns you not to dredge up painful memories. Family members of suspects contact you angry that you might accuse a deceased relative. One threatens legal action. At the same time, a true crime podcast announces a sensational episode claiming to reveal the Phantom's identity based on flimsy hearsay. Your grant funders pressure you to produce results. You feel the weight of expectation and the limitations of evidence degraded over time. One evening, while examining files at the courthouse, you notice a man watching you from across the street. He disappears into an alley. Your rational brain knows he's probably a passerby, but part of you feels the Phantom's presence. You experience firsthand the town's long-standing paranoia. You realize that the Texarkana murders are more than a whodunit. They represent a community's vulnerability at a time of social change. The war had brought violent skills home. Mental health resources were scarce. The killer exploited secluded lovers' lanes, perhaps resenting youth or intimacy. The attacks ended as abruptly as they began. Maybe the perpetrator died, moved away, or found other outlets. Without modern forensic records, law enforcement lacked tools to follow leads. Your investigation cannot conjure evidence that no longer exists. You decide your role is to document the victims' lives and contextualize the crimes. You interview surviving relatives who recall the victims as musicians, churchgoers, students, not just victims. Humanizing them feels like an act of justice. Suspects include Ewell Swinney, a repeat offender, whose wife told police he confessed, then recanted. He fits some eyewitness descriptions. Another theory implicates a veteran who lived nearby and committed suicide. Some suggest multiple perpetrators copying initial attacks. A fringe theory posits that the killer was a woman, pointing to the cologne as perfume. Still others think the Phantom moved on to another region, becoming a different serial killer. Without DNA or confession, none can be confirmed. The pattern of attacks and sudden cessation complicate profiling. Theories reflect our need to name a villain and restore order. When your research is published as a book, it receives modest attention. Some praise your empathy, others criticize the lack of a definitive culprit. You return to Texarkana for a lecture. An elderly man approaches you afterward, tears in his eyes, and thanks you for telling his sister's story. As you leave, the full moon rises above the town. Car headlights flash on a distant road. You think about the Phantom killer, whether he was Ewell Swinney, another suspect, or someone unknown, and how he vanished into history. The town still locks its doors, but the fear has softened. The murders remain unsolved, but through your work, the victims are remembered as more than headlines. You walk back to your hotel, hearing only the hum of cicadas and the soft thrum of your own heart. The 10,000-year-old dwarf skeleton, a little human or another species. On the Indonesian island of Flores in 2003, a team of archaeologists uncovered a tiny skeleton in the limestone cave of Liang Bua. The bones belonged to an adult standing barely over 3 feet tall, with a brain the size of a grapefruit. Radiocarbon dating placed the remains at about 18,000 years old. Local folklore told of little people, the Ibu Gogo, living in the forest. As a physical anthropologist fascinated by human variation, you read the first papers with astonishment. If the bones represented a separate species named Homo floresiensis, then our family tree just became more complex. Years later, you join a team traveling to Flores to examine additional remains and to engage with the local communities whose stories seem to echo this discovery. The tiny skeleton raises fundamental questions. Was Homo floresiensis a distinct species that coexisted with modern humans, or was it a modern human with a pathological condition like microcephaly or Down syndrome? As more bones are excavated, including wrist bones, jaws, and leg bones, it becomes clear that several individuals shared the small stature and brain size. You want to compare their anatomical features to those of Homo erectus australopithecus and modern humans using CT scans and 3D modeling. You also plan to collect DNA if preserved to see how closely they relate to us. The possibility of a different human lineage surviving until relatively recently fuels your desire to understand our evolutionary narrative. Flores sits on the Wallace Line, a biogeographical boundary separating Asian and Australian fauna. Homo erectus fossils have been found in nearby Java. The Liang Bua cave layers show occupation from 95,000 to 12,000 years ago, with stone tools, charred bones, and evidence of fire. The diminutive hominin remains found there date from 100,000 to 50,000 years ago, with some stone tools even younger. Island dwarfism is a known phenomenon in animals isolated on islands, leading to smaller elephants and deer. Could hominins undergo a similar reduction? Critics argue that one small skeleton could be an abnormal individual. However, multiple small individuals suggest otherwise. Genetic material is degraded in tropical conditions, complicating analysis. Debate within the paleoanthropology community is fierce. In Liang Bua, you help excavate a new chamber where more skeletal fragments emerge. The femur and tibia confirm small body size, while the wrist bones are primitive, resembling those of Australopithecus more than modern humans. CT scans of the skull show brain morphology distinct from microcephalic modern humans. The brain's frontal and temporal lobes are similar in relative proportions to Homo erectus, despite being smaller. Stone tools found in the same layer include sophisticated blades indicating cognitive abilities. Local villagers share tales of the Ibu Gogo, small hairy people who stole food and mimicked human speech. These stories likely predate the archaeological discoveries. Could oral tradition preserve echoes of encounters with another hominin species? The finds paint a picture of a population adapted to island life, possibly using fire and tools with a small but efficient brain. Back at your university, you present your findings expecting excitement. Instead, a heated debate ensues. A senior colleague insists the skeletons are microcephalic Homo sapiens, citing cranial anomalies. He accuses your team of sensationalism. Grant reviewers question funding for further excavations until the classification controversy is resolved. Meanwhile, an influential journal rejects your manuscript, suggesting it lacks definitive DNA evidence. In response, you collaborate with geneticists specializing in ancient DNA. After months of painstaking extraction from the dense petrous portion of a temporal bone, fragments of mitochondrial DNA emerge. Preliminary sequences show divergence from both modern humans and known archaic humans like Denisovans. The results are intriguing, but not comprehensive enough to sway skeptics. A media outlet oversimplifies the preliminary data, proclaiming Hobbit DNA, found fueling public confusion. You realize that scientific classification is as much about consensus as data. Evidence must be robust and replicable. You reflect on the temptation to fit fossils into preconceived categories. The wrist bones and brain shape argue for a distinct lineage, while incomplete DNA muddies the picture. You think about island evolution. Isolation can preserve archaic traits and favor small body size. Perhaps Homo floresiensis descended from Homo erectus, or an even earlier population that island hopped eastwards. Alternatively, they could be a dwarfed branch of modern humans, though their primitive features challenge this. You also consider the ethical aspects of naming a species. It impacts local perceptions and tourism. You revisit the Ibu Gogo stories, appreciating the interplay of folklore and science. The past is filtered through memory and bone, both fragile. One theory holds that Homo floresiensis is a dwarfed descendant of Homo erectus. Another posits they represent a previously unknown hominin lineage that left Africa earlier than Homo erectus. A pathological explanation suggests the remains are modern humans with developmental disorders. Genetic evidence so far leans toward a separate lineage but is not definitive. Some anthropologists speculate that they survived until as recently as 12,000 years ago, and that Homo sapiens may have encountered them, perhaps inspiring Ibu Gogo tales. Others caution against overinterpreting folklore as fossil evidence. The debate illustrates the dynamic nature of paleoanthropology and the challenge of reconstructing life from fragments. Years pass, and more fragments of DNA are recovered, strengthening the argument that Homo floresiensis was a distinct lineage. Yet, without a complete genome, questions remain. The classification gradually gains acceptance, but still has detractors. Liang Bua becomes a protected heritage site, drawing tourists and scholars. You continue to study island evolution, applying lessons from Flores to other contexts. When you return to the cave with a new cohort of students, you tell them about the tiny people whose bones lie beneath their feet and the villagers' stories of Ibu Gogo. You emphasize that science is an ongoing conversation. You walk out of the cave into bright sunlight, the line between myth and fossil shifting, like the shadows at the entrance. Somewhere, perhaps in unexplored valleys, more bones await discovery, inviting future debates about who we were and who we are. The lost city of Pavlopetri, ancient streets under the sea. Off the coast of Laconia in southern Greece lies Pavlopetri, an underwater city submerged by earthquakes around 1000 BC. Here, stone streets, walls, courtyards, and tombs lie preserved under a few meters of clear water. During a sailing trip along the Greek coastline, you moored near the islet of Pavlopetri. A fellow sailor mentioned that snorkelers could swim above a 3,500-year-old town. Unable to resist, you grabbed your mask and fins and slipped into the warm Aegean Sea. What spurred you was the idea of floating over ancient architecture rather than walking it. Pavlopetri is unique. No other submerged Bronze Age city remains so intact. As an amateur diver fascinated by archaeology, you couldn't miss the opportunity. You also read that archaeologists used underwater 3D scanners to map the city, revealing urban planning reminiscent of modern towns. Curious about the sensation of gliding over streets where Mycenaeans once walked, you dove. Underwater, the world became blue and sound muted. The seabed sloped gently, revealing outlines of walls half buried in sand. Rectangular foundations formed grids. Low stone walls defined rooms. Some still had door thresholds. Amphora fragments peeked from seagrass. Fish darted. Sunlight refracted, creating shimmering patterns on the stones. As you swam along a street, your shadow glided over ancient thresholds. You felt like a ghost moving through time. A hermit crab scuttled across what might have been a household altar. Your hand brushed a stone block worn smooth by millennia of water. Turning a corner, you saw two parallel walls forming a corridor. As you approached, a small octopus shot ink and vanished into a hollow. Bubbles from your breath danced toward the surface. The water tasted slightly metallic. A faint current tugged. At one point, you felt as if the temperature dropped when you swam over a particular courtyard. The shift was subtle, yet real. You paused, noting that the seabed there bore a faint engraving of a spiral. Later, reviewing underwater photos, you noticed geometric designs carved into floor slabs where you felt the chill. Back on deck, wrapped in a towel, you learned from a guidebook that Pavlo Petri boasted Rhodes' two-story house gardens and a tomb system. Excavations uncovered pots with linear B inscriptions. Some researchers suggest it was a trading port or administrative center. Earthquakes, possibly accompanied by tsunami, sank the city. Mycenaean ceramics date its occupation to 1600–1100 BC. Advances in underwater archaeology brought its layout to light only recently. Meanwhile, local fishermen had known of stone foundations snagging nets for generations. Theories about Pavlopetri's precise role vary. Some propose it was a hub linking Crete and the mainland. Others think it was a planned settlement showcasing urban organization of the Mycenaean world. Fringe ideas romanticize it as an Atlantis prototype. More grounded ones discuss sea level rise and subsidence as reasons for its submergence. Marine biologists point out that seagrass meadows now protect and obscure remains complicating excavation. Conservationists warn that anchor damage and souvenir hunters threaten the site. Since your swim, you find yourself tracing the outlines of city blocks when looking at maps, imagining waves covering them. When you close your eyes, you sometimes feel as though you're back underwater, breathing through a snorkel, gliding over silent stones. The memory of coolness above the spiral floor still perplexes you. Was it a cold spring emanating from beneath? Or your imagination, Pavlopetri, remains both visible and elusive. A town you can visit only by hovering over it, never truly entering. Its stones rest beneath waves, reminding you how thin the line can be between land and sea, between present and memory. The Osirian. Submerged temple at Abydos. Behind the grand mortuary temple of Seti at Abydos lies a sunken structure known as the Osirian. It consists of a rectangular basin surrounded by massive granite pillars, partially filled with water year-round. Carved chambers connect to the basin via corridors. Archaeologists date its construction to the New Kingdom, yet some claim it predates Seti's temple. On a trip to Egypt, you were determined to see this enigmatic site often overlooked by tourists. The idea of a temple perpetually underwater fascinated you. Your interest was piqued by a documentary hinting that the Osirian's megalithic blocks bear no inscriptions unlike later temples. Some fringe authors suggest it is evidence of an antediluvian structure reused by Seti. Conversely, Egyptologists argue it represents an underground representation of the primeval mound, rising from chaotic waters fitting within known religious narratives. You wanted to decide for yourself if its architecture felt different from surrounding structures. Passing through Seti's temple with its colorful reliefs, you descended a walkway to the Osirian. The temperature dropped. Before you lay a trench filled with clear water reflecting the sky. Rectangular granite blocks, some weighing dozens of tons, framed the basin. They were precisely cut and fitted, their surfaces smooth but mottled by lichen. Pillars rose from the water like the trunks of petrified trees. Narrow chambers with barrel ceilings flanked the central pool. The faint sound of dripping echoed. The air smelled of damp stone and algae. Wading along a walkway, you touched the granite. It was cool and dense. Peering into the water, you saw small fish darting among submerged blocks. On a wall, a faint inscription added by Seti recorded his restoration. The absence of decoration on most blocks felt intentional, focusing attention on form rather than image. When you pressed your ear to a pillar, you heard a low resonance like distant thunder. As you moved into a side chamber, you felt pressure in your ears, similar to descending underwater. Your balance faltered for a moment, as if the room gently swayed. Later, while standing at the edge of the basin, a sudden gust blew through the corridor, making ripples on the water. The ripples propagated in patterns that looked like waves emanating from 2 points intersecting to form standing patterns. You watch mesmerized. In that moment, you recalled images of somatic shapes formed by sound waves on surfaces. Were the ripples coincidental, or did the Osirion amplify subtle environmental vibrations? The idea that water, stone, and sound intertwined here took hold. Back home, you delved into scholarship. Mainstream Egyptologists date the Osirian to Seti's reign, citing structural similarities to his temple. Its lower elevation and water infiltration may be due to rising water tables. The lack of inscriptions could be because it served a ritual purpose requiring austerity. Fringe writers point to a cartouche labeling it the mansion of millions of years, linking it to Osiris cult, and argue it could be older. Some propose it was a technological structure, a resonator or energy generator. Engineers note that the granite's density and arrangement could create acoustic effects. Theories vary. Some see the Osirion as a symbolic tomb of Osiris, representing his death and rebirth in watery depths. Others think it was a cenotaph for Seti built in an archaizing style. There is speculation that its builders sought to evoke antiquity deliberately by using megalithic blocks. A more exotic idea suggests it is a surviving fragment of an earlier temple, submerged by flood reused by later dynasties. The interplay of water and stone invites interpretations involving ritual purification and sound. Since visiting, you sometimes replay the memory of ripples forming interfering patterns in your bathwater. The sound of distant thunder reminds you of the low resonance within the pillars. When you hear water dripping in a cave, you recall the cool air of the Osirian and the sense of descending to a primordial place. The site, with its mix of orthodox history and speculative theories, left you with the impression that sometimes mysteries are less about being solved and more about being felt as relationships between elements and senses that cannot be fully articulated. Why Egyptians defaced royal tombs, erasing the eternal. In ancient Egypt, preserving the name and image of the deceased was essential for afterlife survival. Yet, archaeologists find royal tombs with names and faces chiseled away. The faces of Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, and others were defaced deliberately. Was it political vengeance, religious reform, or protective magic? As an Egyptologist, you toured several tombs with defaced cartouches. The thought of priests chiseling away what they were sworn to protect fascinated and saddened you. One tomb in particular, belonging to a lesser-known queen, drew you into its shadowy chambers. You were inspired by a research paper analyzing tool marks on defaced reliefs. It suggested different hands, some careful, some angry. The idea that erasure could be ritualized or spontaneous intrigued you. Theories ranged from damnatio memoriae to demonic protection. You wanted to see the marks up close. The Valley of the Queens in Luxor, with fewer tourists than the Valley of the Kings, offered a quiet setting to contemplate ancient censorship. The tomb's walls were vibrant with frescoes of the queen and ritual scenes. Yet in many, her face was scratched out, leaving oval depressions. The hieroglyphs of her name were gouged. Small plaster patches covered deeper gouges. Running your fingers near, never on the carvings you felt the texture change where defacement occurred. In some scenes, other figures remained intact, suggesting targeted erasure. The air was cool and smelled of dust and resin. A bat fluttered overhead. As you sketched, a small pebble fell from the ceiling, landing near your foot. The silence closed in. Later, while reading inscriptions, you noted spells designed to protect tombs from those who would damage them. Ironically, those same spells failed to prevent later desecration. You visited Akhenaten's Sun Temple ruins. His images were smashed. In Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, her statues had been buried or recarved. Some defacements seemed purposeful, erasing a memory. Others looked like reuse of stone with names chiseled off to make way for new ones. The motives varied across time. Scholars propose multiple reasons. One is political successors sought to erase rivals to legitimize their rule. Another is religious images of heretical rulers like Akhenaten were destroyed to appease gods. A more personal motive might be jealousy or local grievances. Some think defacing images protected the tomb from looters by breaking the magical link to the afterlife. There's also evidence that tomb builders reused limestone blocks, chiseling off earlier names out of practicality. The pebble falling could have been geology or a reminder of time's constant erosion. Afterward, you notice graffiti in modern cities differently. They may scratched out new ones, spray painted over. You think about how erasure can be both violent and bureaucratic. When you cross out a word in your notes, you wonder how that small act echoes ancient chisels. Tombs with defaced names remind you that memory is not just preserved but actively constructed and destroyed. They also highlight the resilience of stories, as we still know Hatshepsut, despite attempts to erase her. The queen whose face you saw defaced remains nameless to most, yet her scarred images speak volumes about power and vulnerability.